All right. Oh, hello, everyone. Really glad to see everyone here in Singapore. And so I changed my title at the last minute because I thought there was a lot of debate and a lot of, I think people have different understanding of what MCP is. So I want to frame it this way. So in my mind, MCP is the hands and feet of the large language model. When I talk to older people, that's the large language model can change everything. They always say, but humans can always push the button. Okay, they can turn it off because it's only a brain in the box. Except with MCP, it's no longer the case. You see, this is my office desk. 2 hours ago before I come here. Okay, so I have all those devices controlled by MCP using local large language model. So nowadays, not only you can control things like microphones, speakers, and things like that, you can also control things like drones and the small cars. So we had an event last year at Austin, Texas. One of the professors that we work with, that was before the MCP days. He came up with a drone, and so he used large language model to generate drone instructions. So he would say, see what's behind that wall. It would generate instruction for the drone to take off, fly 10 feet ahead, and turn around, take a picture, and come back. Okay, so so all those things are feet and the hand of the large language model. So the large language model can actually do things. It's not just something brain in the box, only thinking, right? So, well, okay. So that's the introduction. I'll do a shameless plug about myself. So bear with me. So I started those 2 open source projects at the top. One is called WaterMesh. We are one of the largest WebAssembly projects in the world. So I started in 2019. The reason is that I built my career and made most of my money in the early days of Java application servers. And with WebAssembly, we see the same opportunity, but with Rust and Go. Okay, so it's the same abstraction, same idea, but with different programming language. So we started in 2019, and it was widely used in places like Australia and things like that. And then right after the pandemic, we started another project called Llama Edge, which is to use WebAssembly to use large language model on edge devices. So then I founded 2 companies that commercialize those 2 projects. One of them is called Gaia. We have Gaia is headquartered in the US. We have about 20 people in the US, most are in New York City, and have a small team here in Singapore. And the other one is ByteTrade. ByteTrade is here in Singapore. We have 20 people in Singapore now, and then have about 10 people in Taipei as engineering team as well. So so this is so we have open source projects largely built around large language model, and commercial companies commercialize those projects, right? So that's it for now. So before we get into the demo or anything, let's I want to take a step back to say, because people keep asking me, that's okay, MCP is a hand and feet of large language model. So what? That's is there an opportunity to build a business or to make a big impact with that? So in my opinion, it is one of the greatest things that happened. Because if you look at how computers evolve, who are the real users of computers? At early days, when we say human-computer interface, those humans, right? The web and mobile era, companies like Microsoft, Google, and Apple was building that. You have applications where you have UI toolkits, web UI, mobile UI, whatever. The design is very focused on humans. Okay, how does computer interact with humans? And then a couple of years later, the main client of computers of computer programs become other computers. That's where we enter the API first era, right? So we have companies like Stripe, like Shopify, like Tableau, like AWS. All those companies, their product is primarily not for humans, but for other computers to consume. Okay, so that's the API first era. Now we are entering the AI era, meaning that's the primary use of computer are AIs. So this is one of the most fundamental changes that I have seen in my career is that over all those years, most of my employees are building products for other humans to consume. Today, most of my employees are building products for AI to consume. Okay, they are trying to train AIs. They are trying to make AI smarter. So that's if you really think about the work that you do today, you're probably doing this as well. Is that you are trying to come up with better prompts. You are trying to come up with better ways to use AI, right? So to say what's the in the next couple of years, what's the real use of computer? We think it's going to be increasingly other AIs, and MCP plays a really big role in here. So people, I think someone just asked this question. That's isn't MCI just a large language model tool course? So if you go to the Llama documentation page, we have a nice page about large language model tool course. So I think it's worthwhile to spend a couple minutes to explain what is large language model tool course. So this is a typical conversation. If you run large language model, say Channel 3, on Llama page, and then start, so you can ask the large language model to do something that is not in the language model itself, not in the brain, but in the candidate feed. For instance, help me schedule a meeting. Help me write down there's a meeting with the marketing team and blah blah blah. Right? So the large language model, because it doesn't have access to a calendar, what it's going to do is that it's going to return this structured piece of data to say, I want to call this tool and create tasks, and the task, the name of the task have a meeting with the marketing team. Okay. So the agent that wraps around the large language model sees this and knows this is not intended for humans. Okay, it is intended to call a function called create task, and in that application, that agent application is already configured where this function is. This function could be a web service call, and in this particular case, it's just a Python function. Okay, so it goes on to create to call the Python function, and it creates this task in the local MySQL database, and then it returns result okay. Again, this result goes to the large language model. Large language model sees this and then constructs this response for the user to say, I have added this to your task list. Is there anything else that you like, right? So the human opens his calendar and will be able to see that, right? So you think this is very similar to MCP, isn't it? I mean, this is already, I'm letting the large language model to do things that are beyond thinking, right? So that's hence the question. Isn't MCP just the large language model tool course? Except it's not. It goes one step further. So this is a defining graph that's the MCP people will come up with MCP. They try to convince people why do we need a new standard. It's to say they want, because this tool call format I just showed you is too fragile. Everyone can define their own tool call parameters and their message formats in JSON or in XML and whatever. MCP allows you to define a unified and standard way to communicate what are those tools and how to call those tools. So they call themselves, MCP calls itself the USB of large language model context. Okay, so it provides a standard interface. I think that's the whole value of standardization. So people say, does MCP enable you to do anything that was previously impossible? Of course not. It's the same thing, the same way HTTP doesn't enable you to do anything TCP/IP wouldn't let you do, right? But it makes things easier by providing a standard interface. So using that, you can plug all the SaaS services, you can plug any local applications into your large language model and make your large language model interact with it. So let's go back to the early story that I talked about. That's use large language model to control the drone. Before the MCP, what I didn't mention is how they control the drone. They fine-tune the large language model so that when you speak to it in English, it does not respond in English. It responds in Python. Okay, so it was fine-tuned on the Python toolkit of that drone. And so when I say please go behind that wall and see what's happening, it respond the Python command that you can upload into the drone, and then you can then command all this flying and taking picture and all that, right? So you can see what this process is highly non-standard because it generates code, which is fragile because switch to another brand of drone, you will not be able to fly. So but the MCP architecture really is I think the key value really is that provide the standardization of this thing. So that's why the big tech companies are so afraid of it and also want to embrace it. So Sundar Pichai, you guys know, right? He's the CEO of Google. So he first said, to MCP or not to MCP, that's a question, because as a big company like Google, it is impossible to let the standard controlled by someone else. So what they did last week in Las Vegas is that they came out with their extend and embrace approach. So they published a new standard called A2A. Maybe we can talk about that in another meeting, which is agent-to-agent protocol, and it was built on top of MCP, right? So for large company like Google, they want to control the destination of a new standard like MCP by extending it, by incorporating it into their large language model offerings, and eventually make all of us use it, right? But at open source community, we always resist things like that. Okay, so because we don't want Google to control this important standard. So so that's why I'm here to talk about this, to talk about our new project. Anyway, so before we go much further, I want to show you a demo. So let me see. So demo is how the MCP server works. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to start MCP server. So if you look at, I know it may be hard to read. Can you read it? Okay. So this last line is OpenMCP, is a utility that we developed. It's written entirely in Rust, and it's stand up MCP server in the Python program inside this Docker container. And the reason we are using the OpenMCP, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but here we are using it because we want to expose this MCP server, this local MCP server, outside of Docker, so that the host application outside of Docker can access it, right? So if I go to this cursor, right? So I also use cursor, and I already configured the localhost 8081, which is the port the host shares with the Docker guest, right? And if I reload this, it's going to discover this MCP server. As you can see, this here, the log says, someone is asking for information about me. So I responded. So let me see, cursor. Okay. So then in the cursor agent mode, I will be able to do that. So what does this MCP do? So this MCP is a very complex piece of software service. It is not something just upload the file into GitHub. That's schedule a meeting in the calendar or something like that. It takes a paragraph of text and use another large language model to generate a script of two people talking. If you know Notebook LM, it does the same thing, but with entirely open source models, with open source runtimes using Monterey, right? So, and then it builds a podcast out of it, and then it generates TTS, generate voice between those two characters, and then it builds animated video out of it, right? So it does all those things. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give it a prompt to say, because I'm not Singaporean, I'm American, but there's I know you guys are having an election. I hope that you don't make our mistake and accidentally kill someone that you're gonna regret, right? So let me say I want to learn more about this, right? So let's say tell me about major political parties in Singapore and their policies. Give generate a podcast video and give me the link. Okay, so I'm gonna say that. What it does is that in Cursor, it has its built-in large language model. I believe this is okay. So it wants to search. Please don't search. Just use your knowledge, because this is current event. So I think it wants to search the internet and find things, but it may take too long. So it goes on and generates all this text about various political parties. But who has time to read? I don't have time to read. So at the end, it will say, do you want to turn that into a video? Because in the prompt, I say, turn that into a video. So I say, run this tool, goes to that MCP tool, and then, did it do it? Yes. It generated a link to that video, okay? So, of course, it's gonna take a while for this video to generate, because, because I'm running everything on my other laptop, which is, is generating maybe 10 tokens per second. So it's gonna take a while to do that. But you can already see it give me a link, and I can go to that link and see what's going on. So it says it's pending, so it's going to generate it. So we're going to wait for it to generate while we move on to our to the rest of our presentation. Where we are. Okay, so this is the first started this demo and that's the end. So okay, so we talked about the MCP as a USB for large language model context. But the question really is, which USB are you talking about? All right, okay, because a lot of people feel that USB itself is a failed standard already. There's 1.0, there's 2.0, there's 3.0, and 3.1, and there's the USB-C, USB-A, and USB-C with PD, with power delivery, and Thunderbird and all that stuff. So in the and if you consider what Microsoft has done, there's an increasingly possibility that the MCP standard is going to fragment, right? So, and also there's we talked about the evolution from the human-based user interface to the API world of MCP, and I also think the speaker, the API had done a very good job explaining, the evolution between API to MCP. However, to take existing API to MCP it's not a trivial amount of work. It's somewhat difficult because APIs are designed for rule-based machines, are designed for other computers, are not designed for large language models. They tend to be two worlds. The APIs would have a long list of parameters, and each parameter would have a structure to it. And the large language model would have to be trained very well in order to reliably generate code that calls those APIs, right? So for the large language model to take this API and generate MCP calls, it is pushing the limit for a lot of for complex APIs. It's pushing the limit for a lot of large language models. And API authentication is also not suited for MCP because there was a well-known incident that happened, I think, maybe a month ago. That's shortly after MCP come out. So someone developed an MCP server that says it can do X, Y, Z. Okay, then someone started running it, and yes, it can do X, Y, Z, but it also does search for Bitcoin keys on your local machine. Okay, so it is how to secure MCP servers is a fresh challenge. That's also why when cloud first come up with the MCP concept, it's mostly talking about the MCP server being run locally. The MCP server is not exposed to the world, so that as a person running locally, you can have better control over it. So I'm saying there's some fundamental difference between how API work and how MCP work. Primarily because their target audience is different. One is targeting the other deterministic machine, and the MCP is targeting the non-deterministic, so hallucinating large language model, the neural network, right? So there is a need to encapsulate API details in MCP, meaning that you would have, so for instance, that podcasting generated API, we managed to trim it down to a very simple 2 parameters, just to the text that you want to generate the podcast from, and then a title, right? And because of that, it is difficult to expose MCP servers the same way as API servers, because the API servers, you can say, I need authentication, I need all those, but there will be far more MCP servers than API servers, because every combination of the API would be exposed as MCP. So for instance, you would think about GitHub, right? There's GitHub has a set of APIs where you can, you can do various things, and each person would have log in with their token, and then have those APIs do things on their behalf. But with the MCP servers, you're going to simplify things a lot by saying, just take my credentials and review this PR, for instance. That'd be, there'll be an API. This API takes one parameter, which is the URL to that pull request, right? So it's so we would see a lot more API combinations that be combined into MCP. So there will be far more MCP servers than API servers. That creates a situation where you need to manage those MCP servers. And also because those MCP servers could be highly complex on the back end, because they're going to run large language models, they're going to run a lot of other things. So there will be need for you to properly secure it so that it doesn't take all the resources, it doesn't abuse your credentials, for you to monetize it. because it's going to cost you money, cost you social capital in order to use some of the APIs. So so someone who's using the MCP server on your behalf it only makes sense that they should pay you as well. So the need to manage API and to fund API, to have API keys and to fund those API keys become an upfront issue with MCP servers. So that's where we, seeing those shortcomings, I think this. About 2 weeks ago, we had an MCP event in Taipei. A lot of people came, and then we decided to start a new project called OpenMCP. And it was I think it's quite well received because we 2 days ago we sent out the tweet and it's already 50,000 views. So the idea is really to build a universal plug for any MCP server to any other MCP standard. So you can develop the MCP server in any standard and then expose it in another standard. For instance, you can have a SSE HTTP based MCP server and run locally. You can have a local MCP server and run in SSE. You can use local server in HTTP streaming. You can have HTTP streaming SSE. So so any combination of the protocols that you can do. And upfront, it's going to support security rules and API keys, meaning that you can have user-defined and pluggable security rules in terms of who can access, what type of API keys can access, and how do I check balances of those API keys, right? And building support for payments, both in terms of Stripe with fiat currency and cryptocurrency, So there's we were only into this journey for 2 weeks, so we have some software that we can show, but there's far more that we want to do, right? So if you're interested, I would encourage you to follow this. Anyway, so this is the software that we have done, which I don't think it's that so it basically is a USB connector part of it. So you connect one node to other node. As we can see, as more large companies come to embrace MCP, they're going to have a lot more competing standards. We already have two, 3 more transportation modes that's in discussion already. And so you would soon definitely need a Smith Arbiter wire or a USB hub in order to connect any 2 MCP servers. They all call MCP, but they are not going to be able to talk to each other without hub like this. Okay. So I want to I don't think, so this is what under the hood of the demo that I have just shown, so the demo is really, easy, so there's a little bit of Python code that stand up the MCP server locally, and then we have the open MCP to make it exposable through the network, so that cursor can connect to it through the host port, right? And you can see of all the configurations, there's a large language model prompt, and then those are all large language model endpoints. Those are all OpenAI compatible large language model endpoints that started by Llama Edge. So that's what I was saying. You can run everything privately in a single office. You can run. So I have a couple of Mac Minis and also NVIDIA Jetson Nano devices in my office, right? So I run large language models of different sizes and TTS models different sizes on those devices, so that I can synthesize them into, so that I can use them in my own MCP service, right? So I want, because I don't know if other video has finished, but here I do have a video that's finished. So I want to show you this video for like 1 minute, and you can see for this video it generated all 7 minutes of video about Singapore politics. This is. Systems and sorry about that. Sorry. Let me So that's it. Yeah. So, well, if you want to watch the video, watch it here. Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Are you using Llama H as the LLM and the GaiaNet for API export?
That's correct. So Llama H is the large language model runtime. So you can think about it like Olama or PyTorch, or there's a bunch of those. And the reason to use Llama H is really, well, since you asked, I'll take this opportunity. That's is that it's cross-platform across GPUs. So you can have the same application. It's the same idea as Java had all those years ago. You can have the same application that runs on CUDA, runs on Palm, runs on ARM, runs on Huawei. That's they're all going to leverage the GPU. So without any blockchain.
Presentation. I'm just curious, like, you play it out, will APIs and MCP still exist together? And like when, is there gonna be a mass migration of MCPs to be more, or APIs to be more MCP aware or not? Why would someone stay in an API versus not?
Yeah, so I think the API is definitely here to stay. Like the user interface, human user interface is also here to stay, right? It's just I think we are expanding the landscape. The API, the chief benefit, the huge advantage API has over MCP is that it is deterministic. So if you write code to call those APIs, right? That's you can use large language model to generate code to call those APIs, but it's deterministic. The MCP, this large language model itself, decides when to call it and how to call it, right? So it's if it hallucinates, you're gonna have to live with that, right? So.
Sorry, but this is the last question, but I think Michael will be there until 9 p.m.
Hey, brilliant presentation. I was wondering, can I get your thoughts or guidance on a challenge I've been having? So I think based on my experience, MCP works great if it's a one-shot use case, right? Like, let's say Salesforce. I just want to go in Salesforce, ask some questions about a customer or whatever. It calls the Salesforce MCP and answers the question, right? But I think when it comes to multi-chain, where, for example, my task is go into Salesforce, get the name of the customer, and then fire an invoice to the customer, right? Then you need to call the more than one MCP, right? You call Salesforce MCP, you call your payments processor as MCP, like Stripe or something, right? And I think that's where it's not as effective. Certain use case, certain samples it gets it right, but certain samples it hallucinates, it doesn't really do the task. And I think the challenge there is because it needs to call the first MCP first, get the results, and then take that output to pass it to the second MCP, right? So, what's your advice on that?
That's a great question. So if you see the demo that I've shown, it's already called two MCPs, right? The first I asked the political parties, and because it knows it's current event, it wants to search the internet. If I allow it to search the internet, it's gonna get the result from the internet and then call the podcasting generating tool, right? So it is definitely possible to chain together. But I think it's also make a strong case for encapsulating more functionalities into the MCP server. So you can see the video generating MCP server. I could break up into 5, right? I could break up to say generate the script first, and then generate the audio, and then stuff like that, have it all in a row. But the complexity can grow exponentially with each MCP tool that add onto it, because you say each one has 80% of success rate. If you have 6 in a row, so 80% to the power of 6, which gets you, I think less than 10%, maybe. I don't know, but that's so I think that's why I say there are going to be far more MCP servers than APIs, because all those individual tasks that can be decomposed by API in the past are going to be bundled together in MCP now, just to avoid the problem that you have mentioned, right? So yeah, thank you. Yeah.